Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach F1 channel, and in today's video I'm going to be going over everything you will need to know for Imola for the F1 Fantasy. Now before we get into that, we're going to look at how well my team did last weekend, and of course I used the Limitless, and I got 358 points overall. Yes, the Chinese Limitless would have been better, however the Miami Limitless was not terrible by all means. You probably would have lost out about 20-ish points to the Chinese Limitless if you used the team I used. That's about how much I lost out to, but 358 points, it puts me up to 126th place in the world, which I'm extremely happy about, hoping to keep these results up until the end of the season. However, before we get into the video, like and subscribe, follow my Twitter for more updates on F1 Fantasy, join my Discord where we have discussions about F1 Fantasy and just F1 in general, and join my F1 Fantasy League as we now have 620 people in it. So it's starting to become a very big league. Now first up, most people will know this, however, just in case anyone is behind on this weekend is straight back to the normal way the weekends work. There is no sprint race this weekend, it is only practice 1 to 3, qualifying, then the race. That needs to be talked about is the upgrades that are coming in for Imola. So McLaren brought in upgrades for Miami, which did work out for them. Obviously, we saw Norris winning, Piastri only had half the upgrades, and he looked very good as well. However, it's very easy to just go, okay, McLaren are going to do well in Imola. However, it could be very different as Red Bull, Mercedes, Aston Martin and Ferrari are all bringing upgrades to Imola. Now, Aston Martin, Alonso has said that these upgrades coming into Imola are essential for the 2024 Aston Martin car. So it's safe to say that these upgrades should be pretty big for Aston Martin. So does that mean they're an option this weekend? For me, it's probably still a no. However, we'll look into the team selections you can use. Then we've got Mercedes are still the team you want to steer clear of because we saw half the upgrades in Miami. I'd be surprised if the rest of the upgrades worked any better than the new upgrades that Mercedes have brought in. So Mercedes for now definitely steer clear of, even though they're bringing in the upgrades. And then it really is all eyes on Red Bull and Ferrari. Of course, I expect the Red Bull upgrades to work. It's Red Bull. And Ferrari should follow suit. So it really will be a fight to see Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren in Imola to see who is the better team. It could be very tight up front. However, even though McLaren aren't bringing upgrades to the car, they're putting the rest of the upgrades onto the Piastri's car, and they are the only team that we know of that the upgrades have worked on so far, so there's a bit of safety going for McLaren. However, I still think going into Imola, purely for Red Bull and Ferrari bringing upgrades, it looks like those two are going to be the best teams on the grid. So that probably means their two drivers are going to be in the top 4. And the second point I need to talk about is budget teams versus point teams. Now for me, unless you can't afford the points teams, it's very much an easy option at the minute. The points teams are getting the budget that is close enough to the budget teams to be beating them on points by quite a margin. Also be bringing in sometimes even better increases in prices. So I still think price very much beats out budget. Also, because of how much the cheaper drivers are increasing in price, what are we actually increasing the budget for? Realistically, just to go to the Verstappen team for now. But then we move on to the best driver for under 7 million. And for now, there are only 2 drivers. It's Bottas and Sargent. And for me, it's still Sargent who is the better option. In Miami, Sargent was actually on for a very good haul of points. Of course, he got the -20 for getting the DNF. And that was all Kevin Magnussen's fault. So Sargent is definitely one to keep an eye on. Bottas is still a very good shout. Sauber's pit stops have been a lot better recently, so I'm a little bit less scared to use them. However, both Bottas and Sargent, really you only need if they're the last resorts on your team. However, out of Bottas and Sargent, I would still go for the Williams all day, as they fit the F1 Fantasy point scheme of looking terrible in qualifying and having a little bit better race pace, or enough race pace to get up to like 17th, 16th, which is good enough from 20th to 17th or 16th to get a decent amount of points. Basically what Alpine were at the start of the season. Then let's have a look at the drivers under 9.5 million. For me, the drivers to steer clear of under 9.5 million would be Esteban Ocon. I think he got pretty lucky in Miami. I don't expect to see that many points from him again. And also, Alpine have lost their status of knowing that they're going to qualify last and gaining a few positions over the race. Maybe not from overtakes, but just DNFs and stuff. So for Ocon at 9.5 million, I just don't think it's worth it. Then you have Daniel Ricciardo. The reason for this is I think his teammate is a much better option, and it's only 0.1 million increase. And at 9.3 million for Daniel Ricciardo, he hasn't really done very well F1 fantasy-wise this whole season. And I just don't think it's worth having him in your team, considering there are such better options. And then I think the final one, again, is Pierre Gasly, purely because Alpines, like I said, they've lost their edge on being very good F1 fantasy-wise, and I think the Williams drivers have overtaken them for those sorts of points you'll be getting in F1 fantasy. Then for the rest of the drivers under 9.5 million, I think Albon is a very good option at 8 million. Like I've said, Williams are the new Alpine, qualifying 19th and 20th, then just getting a few overtakes or just getting a few positions gained. Of course, they both have to finish the race, which for a Williams is quite difficult. However, if they finish the race, they are decent drivers to have. And at 8 million and at 6.1 respectively, they are very good options. I also think both Haas drivers are very good. Hulkenberg, I actually do think is a better option at the minute, purely because Magnussen almost has a race ban. And with the amount of penalties he's picking up, it's losing him a lot of position gained points, especially when he is helping out Hulkenberg most of the time. So when he's helping out Hulkenberg, it means Hulkenberg is getting more points. However, both of them at 8.6 and 8.1 million are very good options. And then I think you have a clear first place for under 9.5 million, which is Yuki Tsunoda. He had an amazing race weekend in Miami. He is very consistently getting into qualifying into the top 10 and sticking there. And even when he doesn't, he manages to find a way in there, getting a few points, which is perfect for us in F1 Fantasy. And then finally, I think one driver to look out for, especially with all of these upgrades coming in, is Lance Stroll at Aston Martin. He is 12.8 million before Imola, which means he is still below that 15 million price range increase. So until he reaches that 15 million mark, it's almost a guaranteed 0.5 million increase if he doesn't have a DNF like he had in Miami. Then we move on to the best high mid-level drivers. Of course, this is the battle between Perez, Leclerc, Sainz, Norris and Piastri. Don't really think Mercedes fit into this position anymore, and I don't think Alonso does either. So that's the first point off of that. And also, I think Perez could be a little bit of an issue now. I think if Ferrari upgrades work, and even still Red Bull's upgrades work, Piastri and Norris in that upgraded McLaren should do better than potentially Perez. Leclerc and Sainz probably will do better, and that could leave Perez ending in 5th or 6th position, which just isn't good enough as your top driver pick. So I really do think that these days it is the Ferrari boys that look like the best option, as with their upgrades coming in, we know they're reliable anyway. Without the upgrades, they looked good in Miami. And then it would be the McLaren boys, Norris and Piastri. But out of all of them, I think the one to keep a real keen eye on is Oscar Piastri at 20 million. Because I haven't really spoken about him a lot because Norris has seemed like the better option. However, Norris is getting close to that 25 million limit. And when he reaches that, he won't be worth that much. And considering Piastri will have those upgrades onto the McLaren, and he looked very good in Miami, he could be a bargain at 20 million for quite a few teams. And then constructor-wise, in F1 Fantasy, I still believe it's Red Bull and Ferrari that are the two main constructors you want to be working with. However, keep an eye on McLaren and Aston Martin, as there are some team selections you can choose McLaren and Aston Martin in that actually look very good going into Imola, which I will talk about now. So, like usual, I'll talk about the best team that is possible first, which still is the Verstappen Red Bull Ferrari team. The reason for this is if you had Red Bull McLaren, your cheap drivers are too bad. And I think Red Bull Ferrari still are very much the dominant constructors, like I said. Verstappen still is the best two-times driver to have, most likely to get pole position, most likely to win the race. Yes, he didn't win in Miami, but without the safety car, he probably would have. And yes, he would have got a few more points after that. And I do think in Imola, it will be the same story with Verstappen at least. So we'll start off looking at the best team you could have with Verstappen. And this team is 113.8 million. So yes, it's only 4 people who have had insane budget increases. However, some people will have had this. So I'll show each team for everyone they can choose. However, the rest of the teams will be drop-down variants from this team, which is Verstappen, Zhou, Albon, Tsunoda, Hulkenberg with Red Bull and Ferrari. I think Albon is such a good option right now, and he's such a difference from Sargent, especially same with Zhou up from Bottas. It's not too insane of a drop down, and it's not too much of an increase. It's just about that safety where Bottas and Sargent both look a little bit more of an unknown compared to their teammates Zhou and Albon. And then of course Yuki and Hulkenberg, Haas and VCarb both looking very good. With the Verstappen as your star boy, it's a very good team, and there's no team that's going to beat a team like this. And then again, if you don't have 113.8 million, you could have 112.3, which would be just to drop Zhou to Logan Sargent. Like I've said, Logan Sargent, the best driver under 7 million. Then if you need more value, drop Albon to Zhou. Then if you need more value, drop Zhou to Bottas. And then finally, if you need more value than that to get down to 109.6 million, drop down Tsunoda to Alex Albon. Now, the minimum team you could have with Verstappen is 109.1 million with Red Bull and Ferrari. However, if you get to these lower costing teams for Verstappen, you are running the risk of having double Williams, double Sauber, which is a very difficult team to have. However, I still think even the lowest team of then dropping Albon to Zhou for 109.1 million is still better than Perez, Leclerc, Sainz, Norris, Piastri-led teams, or the McLaren and Ferrari-led teams, which I will explain soon. However, we also have the alt Verstappen teams, which is Red Bull and Ferrari still. However, it will have Logan Sargent, Bottas and Zhou with Stroll and Verstappen. Now, talking about the McLaren Ferrari teams, the most expensive McLaren Ferrari team I would go for is 113.2 million. And I mean, just look at that team. It looks really good, and it also does look very colourful, which kind of helps its case. This team consists of Verstappen and Alonso with McLaren and Ferrari. I mean, just how tantalising does that sound? You have to have a lot of budget, which obviously a lot of people don't have. But if you have this amount of budget, I would highly recommend for going something like this, because Alonso in Aston Martin should be pretty good this weekend. Yes, he's above that 15 million budget, so it's very much a points team. However, Verstappen, Alonso, Sargent, Bottas, Zhou, insane team, and I don't think McLaren down to Red Bull is that much of a drop. We'll see in Imola if it is that much of a drop this weekend, because in last weekend in Miami, McLaren got quite unlucky, and McLaren should have actually been the top scoring constructor. So it's a very interesting team, and definitely not one to scoff at. Now, you also have different variations of the McLaren Ferrari team where you don't use Verstappen. And for me, that's basically where you use Piastri and Sainz instead. And like I said, the main talking points of this team is obviously having Oscar Piastri and Carlos Sainz. Now, you could increase them if you have more money to play around with. I would increase Sainz to a Leclerc if you have more money, or potentially a Piastri to a Norris. However, you need to have quite a bit more money to have this. However, it's such a good drop-down system for anyone who loves this sort of layout. Of course, just drop your cheaper drivers down. So if you don't have enough money for 110.3 million, but you have 108.9 million, you can drop Hulkenberg to Bottas. Of course, it's quite a significant drop in points. Then if you need a bit more money, you have Yuki Tsunoda down to Magnussen for 108.1 million. And then if you need more money, you can drop down to Hulkenberg from Magnussen, or even further to Zhou at 107.1 million as the full team. Of course, the risk of this team is not having Red Bull. However, like I've said, if McLaren do as good as they did in Miami, they technically should have been the highest scoring team by quite a margin. However, in Imola, will it be the same story? I don't think so personally. However, I think it's such a good team for anyone who needs that budget building risk, or needs that points building risk because you're a bit further behind, or you just want to try something different to the Verstappen team. This, I think, will rival the Verstappen team on points if the McLarens or Ferraris can do well with the upgrades that they've had from Miami for McLaren and Imola for Ferrari. So we'll just have to wait and see with this team, but I just think it's so interesting how many different team combinations we're getting right now. And it doesn't slow down, because obviously then we've got the normal like mid-level teams we've been talking about in old videos, which is the Perez, Norris, Piastri, Leclerc, Sainz teams with Red Bull and Ferrari, where you could have a team that has Perez, Bottas, Sargent, Hulkenberg, Stroll, Red Bull and Ferrari. Of course, the two big drivers, Perez and Stroll. Like I've said multiple times, Stroll, decent points, increase 0.5 million. And you can change Perez for any of the other 4 drivers I've mentioned. Piastri, Norris, Leclerc or Sainz, depending on how well they look. But this also is a good team to have if you don't have as much team value as everyone else, because then if you still don't have 107.5 million, you could drop Stroll to Yuki Tsunoda, which would only cost you 104.1 million. And then even further, you could drop Yuki Tsunoda to Guan Yu Zhou for 102.3 million, which is such a good team considering of how cheap it is. And it's very good for anyone who's just started up F1 Fantasy or hasn't had the best luck team value wise this season so far. And then guess what? The team combinations do not stop there, because then we have the final team combinations, which is the Aston Martin teams, where you have Red Bull with Aston Martin instead of Red Bull with Ferrari or McLaren with Ferrari. Now, for me, this is probably the weakest team combinations. I've never been a fan of the Red Bull Aston Martin team combinations, and I don't think Aston Martin will be able to crack the Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari teams going into Imola, even with these upgrades. So I don't think it's worth bringing them in. However, I will still go over these teams. Now, first of all, the big one is obviously having Verstappen and Alonso in the same team. You could also drop that to Verstappen and Stroll in the same team. It would be good, wouldn't it? Especially Verstappen and Alonso. Alonso, yes, Aston Martin as a whole wouldn't be able to fight Red Bull, McLaren and Ferrari. However, I think Alonso can still get in the mix a little bit and potentially get a few points. However, this team, not a bad shout. Definitely not my favourite. But the cheaper drivers are okay. Verstappen, definitely the talking point with the 2 times. And a good second driver of Alonso or Stroll is still decent. Or then again, you could do something similar to the McLaren Ferrari teams, where you brought in Oscar Piastri and Carlos Sainz with Red Bull and Aston Martin, if you have the team value for that. Again, I wouldn't recommend this, because if you have the team value for going for something like this, I'd recommend the McLaren Ferrari team. And then if you had even more team value than that, I would recommend the Verstappen Red Bull Ferrari teams. However, that sums up the team selections. So let's talk about chips. Now, for me, I would recommend not using any chips this race weekend. We've had quite a few chips being used over the last few weekends. Of course, I've used No Negative and Limitless now. However, I think save wildcard till after this weekend so we can get a clear idea of how these upgrades are working. Because if Ferrari look good, you could wildcard in to have a Ferrari dominated team, Aston Martin dominated team. You get the idea of what I'm trying to say for Monaco. And then again, I don't think there's any need for Limitless, Extra DRS, Autopilot or No Negative, as it's a normal race weekend. It's not a sprint race weekend. So the teams will be scoring a little bit less points. And then final fix potentially could be used. Again, it only is to be used if someone in your team does really bad in qualifying, F1 fantasy wise. So say Bottas comes 8th and you're like, okay, he's going to just drop down in the order. Let's bring in Zhou instead. That's why you would use final fix. But chips wise, I think that about sums it up. So let's talk about my league right now. Of course, I've already spoken about my league. Thank you all so much for joining it. Here's the link. It will be in the description as well with my Discord and my Twitter. Thank you all so much for joining it. It's such a competitive league at the minute. I am only 10th in my league at the minute. Now, I do have to say there's been a bit of confusion with all the teams in my league, as for some reason, some of the points are different to the global leagues. So I haven't looked now. However, if you see any top 5 shout-outs and realize they shouldn't be there, then I will go have a word on the live chat to see what's going on with my league and why this is only happening to my league. But here are the top 5 shoutouts. So we have #1Paddock, here I come. Well done, 1,780 points. Keeping that first place since last weekend. Very well done. You have used extra DRS though, so everyone else will be hunting you down now. However, very well done. Hopefully you can keep this up for the rest of the season. You got Pesa Racing 3, 1,739 points, increased to 2nd place. Congratulations. You got Obi Guan Yujobi, 3rd place. You dropped to 3rd. However, 1,729 points is an amazing feat. Keep up the good work and you'll definitely be doing extremely well in this league. Then you have Viceroy 1 on 1,722 points. decent weekend for you. It was a shame McLaren didn't work out. However, very good job to move up into 4th in the league. And then finally, we have Charles Leclerc's F1 champ. It's saying you were 5th. However, I don't remember you being in the top 5 last weekend. So maybe that's where the points weirdness was coming along. However, congratulations, 291 points on a limitless weekend. That is pretty decent from you, so congratulations. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all could get something out of this video, team selection wise, or whether or not to pick a driver or a constructor. And thank you all so much for watching. I will be live before qualifying to go over everything again and to go over all of the updates since practice and finalize our teams. Thank you all so much for watching, and I do want to say thank you all so much for the support. I haven't actually uploaded a video last week. Not to get into it too much, but I've had a few issues medically, so I haven't been well enough to record or edit a video. However, I do feel good enough again now to start putting out videos, so I'll be back on that. And because I've kept everyone waiting for videos, I will be posting a video every day for the next 3 days. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.